Hey everyone, it's Tiqqle, and in this video we're going to be talking about Enhanced Shaman. Now I do have a different video that's talking about the changes that happened in Shadowlands Alpha so far with the, Shaman tree abilities all being general across all Shaman specs, and then the enhanced changes per for talents and just changes in general, as well as the talents, and I'll put that link down in the description. But this is more about the feel of the spec. How does it feel? How does it do in the dungeon that's out? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? And my general thoughts of the spec in general, because so much has changed. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Look down below for the timestamps, but we're going to just start off by talking about different builds and specific abilities that are definitely influential for Enhanced Shaman. So talking about Enhanced Shaman, I would say the number one quality of life improvement that has come about in the Shadowlands is the fact that we don't have to maintain the buffs of Frostbrand and Flametongue. These are 30-second buffs you'd have to maintain on your weapons throughout a fight or throughout an arena match. This would cost Maelstrom at the time, and it would be a very annoying thing. You'd have to refresh every 30 seconds. You would have to refresh both every 30 seconds, and that's 2 globals. That is just totally removed. That entire dynamic is totally removed, and what they've done instead is giving you imbues. Now, these imbues are much different than Flametongue, Frostbrand, but they're actually, in my opinion, really awesome, because it kind of brings Shaman back to where they used to be, where you buff your weapon, and sure, you buff them every hour, but every hour is not a big deal. That's just like, a class buff or something like that, Arcane Intellect for a mage, so it's not really that big of a deal. So buffing your weapons with these is pretty cool. So what are those 2 imbues? Number 1 is Wind Fury Weapon. Imbues your weapon with an element of wind. Each attack has 26% chance to trigger 2 extra attacks, dealing extra damage. And now what you need, we'll actually come back to that, but Flametongue Weapon, this is imbues your weapon with the element of fire for 30 minutes. It actually is 60 minutes. Causes each of your attacks to deal 14 additional fire damage. So what's important here, even focusing on this, there's some synergy between those 2 options. Or sorry, these 2 buffs. Number 1, Wind Fury, which you need to put on your main hand weapon. Flametongue needs to go on the offhand weapon. Now the reason for that, very quickly, is Flametongue in the offhand works together with Lava Lash. Lava Lash says damage is increased by 100% if your offhand weapon is imbued with Flametongue. So yeah, you're going to put Flametongue in your offhand, which is totally cool. Now the other thing is, your Wind Fury buff itself says it's going to proc 2 extra attacks. When it procs those 2 extra attacks, each of those extra attacks gets buffed by Flametongue. So it's actually going to proc Flametongue 3 times when you melee and it procs a Wind Fury. That's a lot of extra damage, and that is I think that is a cool way to have these kind of work together, and also to know what position they should be on, what should be on the main, what should be on the off. Now, maybe there is a spec or a build that has Flametongue on your main hand or Wind Fury on your both weapons, but for now, I don't think that's the case. And this is actually kind of a natural place, because Shamans have had imbues on their weapons since Classic, and I think it's just a good place to bring Shamans back to, and is not too troublesome, seeing as it's an hour-long buff that persists through death. Now, next for your shields. Now, in PvE, you're going to be running Lightning Shield, likely. It's just to reflect damage, though. There's nothing actually that synergizes off of that from your talents. You're probably just going to have this just in case, and if you don't, maybe you go for Earth Shield, but to be honest, you'll probably be going to Spectral Wolf or to Static Charge in PvE. In PvP, you're going to be running Earth Shield, most likely. One of the reasons is because Lightning Shield doesn't do that much damage reflecting, but also because Enhanced Shaman, as everyone knows, is a little bit squishier of a class, and that healing from Earth Shield could be pretty significant over time, because Earth Shield does work with your Healing Stream Totem, which is pretty good. You get a little bit more juice out of there. So that's something else that's really nice, just class design standpoint. Now, another thing about the class design for Enhanced that I think is incredibly important is Wind Fury Totem is back. This summons a Wind Fury Totem within 5 health at the feet of the caster for 2 minutes. Party members within 12 yards have a 10% chance to, when they auto attack, to get an extra swing, an extra time. Now, the reason why this is important is because it brings Shaman in as a necessary raid element. This is a very unique skill. This is a very unique utility to bring to the party. You're going to now have groups, raids, that will need to have Enhanced Shamans. You will need Mythic Plus, potentially, groups designed around Enhanced Shamans. And what that does is it reminds me of the day of Classic. Even when Classic was re-released recently, you would have melee groups, you would have caster groups. You may be able to build raid groups or even Mythic Plus groups around your compositions that are a little bit different. there may be an optimal version, but maybe there are multiple optimal versions. Maybe multiple ways you can build a Mythic Plus group now based on Wind Fury. Maybe a warrior, a rogue, and an Enhanced Shaman is very good compared to, let's say, a Destro, an S-Priest, so whatever. So there might be some diversity there that wasn't there before. Now, I don't know if this applies to pets for like BM, but at least this, I think, is a very awesome totem to bring back into the game, and is, again, part of the core Shaman class design that I think is so important to keep fresh in your mind. Now, I think it's annoying that you're going to have to replace it, but it's not in a cooldown, and it lasts for 2 minutes, which is relatively a long time for something to maintain. So I think it's perfectly fine and something that is pretty awesome. Now, Enhanced Shaman also have Flame Shock. Now, this is now in the Shaman tree, which means that every Shaman spec gets Flame Shock. And it's actually going to become important because that is a 18-second debuff that is almost like, I know I mentioned earlier, I don't like maintaining Flame Tongue and Frostbrand, but this actually can do some pretty significant damage compared to Frostbrand and Flame Tongue, which required you to melee. This is something you can spread, and you won't need the melee attacks to proc the damage. So there are builds that we'll talk about later with some talents that actually make that feel pretty darn good. The other thing about Enhanced Shaman now is that they are almost like a hybrid between melee and ranged. So depending on what builds you go, you could have a lot of ranged pressure. One of the things that will help you maintain that ranged pressure is Flame Shock. Elemental Shaman, this is the crux of everything now because of the way that's being set up. We'll have a different video on that, but this is important because this will be a way you can, dot up and multi-dot adds or even multi-dot and rot in Arena. It's a spread pressure mechanic for a melee. And as we know on Ellie, their top damage at the end of an Arena game is Flame Shock. So as Enhance, if you have that same spread pressure as Ellie has, maybe not scaled as much for spell power, it could prove to be pretty powerful. Now, the other ranged abilities like Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt also are doing pretty decent damage, and we'll get into those a little bit later. But those are some key things I just wanted to call out. Also, the use of Maelstrom Weapon. That is returning, which I do think is a very big deal. When you deal damage, you have with a melee weapon, you have a chance to gain Maelstrom Weapon. Each stack of Maelstrom Weapon reduces the cast time of your next damage or healing spell by 20%, up to 100% if it stacks 5 times. Now, that makes Enhance possibly, as I was mentioning, a hybrid between caster and melee. So with that being said, let's now jump to talents and some builds that I see for Enhanced Shaman. Now, let's go over first, if you're going to continue to be a melee Enhanced Shaman, which I believe many people will want to do. Number one on this first tier, taking Forceful Winds. This will be very strong as your Wind Fury is now, with the Imbue and the Totem. It's unclear to me yet how the Wind Fury Imbue and the Totem will interact together, potentially giving you, maybe more chance to proc. Likely not. Probably it will just use the Imbue. But Forceful Winds will be a pretty big part of your, melee damage, especially because of Flame Tongue being procced off of just getting hits. So this will also increase the damage of those melees, as they're doing damage. So that's important. Now, Boulder Fist I don't see as being that useful. Rockbiter is really kind of an extreme filler right now. And remember, no Azurite traits, no essences, so there's nothing to synergize from for those. Now, the next tier, I don't see Totem Mastery being very useful. I think it potentially could from a very standing still boss fight, but to be honest, I don't think that it's a very fun play style. I think it is much better to go for Hot Hand, and I'll get into that in a second. This takes a little bit of explanation. Landslide I see as could potentially be going for very a high spike damage, but to be honest with you, even based on the level 50 templates they've provided, which probably are not optimized for haste, I only have 12% haste, I am getting a lot of procs, and I have to manage a lot of globals already, and I don't think I want to necessarily be fishing just for Storm Strikes. What I would instead prefer is Hot Hand, and this is kind of my go-to for either of the melee or range build, because it says melee auto attacks with Flame Tongue weapon active have a 5% chance to reduce the cooldown of Lava Lash by 75% and increase the damage of Lava Lash by 100%. Now, I don't like this talent in BFA, because it is part of a spender. If you have 100 Maelstrom and you get the proc, you can maximum get out 2 Lava Lashes, and usually there's other things going on, so you cannot. so that's one point. The second point here is because it's not based on Maelstrom, because it is up for 8 seconds, you actually can, and it reduces the cooldown of Lava Lash, you actually can get up to 4 Lava Lashes off in one proc, meaning you can truly weave abilities between the uses of Lava Lash. It's not just a dump of spender. You don't just Lava Lash, Lava Lash, Lava Lash, Lava Lash. You actually will have a cooldown, so you will have to rotate abilities. And I appreciate that from an enhanced rotation perspective. So that's something else. I actually really like this talent. It doesn't, again, synergize with any of your Azerite traits because you don't have those anymore, but the damage is pretty significant anyway. Now, this tier, you can go whatever you want. I think it's up to personal preference. I personally go Earth Shield. I do like that self-healing potential, especially when I'm popping Healing Stream, even in PvE circumstances, to help my healer when I have free globals. Now, the next tier is a very new tier. I'm not 100% confident, but this is how I view each of these talents. In PvE or PvP situation, Storm Strike resets the cooldown on your shock spells. I would expect this to be important to spread flame shocks. So you go in, you put a flame shock on a target, you Storm Strike. You have other things on cooldown, so you will like for example, you don't have a hot hand proc, you don't have Sunder, you don't have maybe Crash Lightning up. You have nothing else to press. You can spread those flame shocks onto additional adds or potentially multi-boss fights. So, or even on a big trash pack that is going to be up for close to 18 seconds, because you want to make sure you get the most out of that global. So if they're going to be alive for 3 seconds, it's not worth spreading that flame shock. But if they are going to be up, like in dungeons, like in the dungeon in this alpha, I would recommend potentially taking this, so you can spread those flame shocks out, on a multi-ad fight or something like that. So that would be very important for spreading flame shocks. Potentially in PvP, again, for spreading flame shocks, or by spreading frost shocks, being able to spam frost shock, because frost shock does have a 6-second cooldown. I don't see that really being the case, but I see this most because usually that's not necessary to spam frost shock somebody, and the damage isn't necessarily worth it. Frost shock is only doing 143 damage. Now, Searing Assault, I see this useful for single target and funneling damage at a particular target, mostly in PvE, because this revolves around your Searing Totem. Basically what this does is a 1-minute cooldown. Strike your target with your offhand weapon for fire damage. For the next 10 seconds, your Searing Totem attacks 100% faster, and your Flame Shock ticks faster. So this is, to me, a single target raid encounter, Tyrannical Mythic Plus, or potentially an arena if you're single target focusing someone, and you want to have the most, a 10-second window of burst. I do think it's risky in PvP because Searing Totem has such low health, but in PvE, I definitely see it as the go-to for single target. Now, Overcharge is an interesting option. I would recommend this for ranged based, if you want to be more hybrid of range. So this may often be a PvE option if you're against 2 casters, or you want to keep your distance. Overcharge, attune your weapon with the elements, generate 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks instantly, and 1 stack of Maelstrom every 1 second for 10 seconds. I mean, once you use this button, you will get across the entire cooldown, you'll get 3 instant casts of a ranged ability. The truth behind this is Lightning Bolt does hit for a pretty decent amount. 400 damage is not bad. Chain Lightning is also something that could hit for a pretty decent amount. An Elemental Blast is it hits for about the same as Lightning Bolt, but it can give you the secondary buff. So if you get 3 of those off at range when you're not able to do any other damage, you keep your Flame Shock up, you'll actually be able to continue pressuring at a pretty decent rate, which is pretty encouraging. The other thing here is if you need heals, if you need to get those instant heals out, this is also a good option. You'll be able to use this and pop heals. Or if you need to AoE heal, you can pop this and drop Chain Heal, because remember, Chain Heal is now part of the entire utility. But in general, in melee, I would say in PvE, if you're going to single target, I would go with Searing Assault, otherwise Hailstorm. Now, this tier is totally movement. It's up to you. Now, this tier, if you're going to go for a pure melee build, you want Sundering. Sundering does a huge amount of damage. It's actually, I was not going to take this, but it just does a ton of damage. That one did 1.4k, but it will crit in some cases. This is a a dummy who I don't know the armor rating, etc. But it was critting mobs for up to like 4K plus, so it does a lot. So I definitely think this is a good option for you to go. But other than that, for this last tier, I think Ascendance is likely going to be the big burst option if you think you're going to need that for single target bosses. Earthen Spike I do think is pretty decent, but because you're hot hand, it isn't necessarily optimal for this build. So I would say between Elemental Spirits to proc and to buff your Storm Strikes or your Lava Lashes or Ascendance, and I would probably lean towards Ascendance for those big burst windows. So now the other build for more range setup is going, you can go potentially Boulder Fist, you can go potentially Elemental Blast. It's up to you. Now, Elemental Blast, it's not really clear how significant this secondary stat is, to be honest. So going Boulder Fist is probably a decent option, especially because Boulder Fist has a range of 20 yards, which is pretty far. 20 yards looks like this. That's very significant right now, especially because it's doing 350 damage, so I definitely recommend doing that. Now, for this tier, I do believe that Hot Hand is still a good option because of the Lava Lash proc and giving your rotation fluidity, but Landslide could be decent because you need, you're going to be using Rock Fighter a decent amount, so eventually, as you're maybe, chasing a mage down, you're going to be able to get those procs going, and then when you actually are able to connect, which is a very small window, you can use those Storm Strikes and get the pressure rocking. Otherwise, Hot Hand is still a good option, especially because it gives you so long to use that ability. This tier's whatever you want it to be. If you're doing ranged ability, I recommend doing Overcharge. Overcharge, again, buffing your Maelstrom weapon proc. So if I press this, I can use Lightning Bolt. And again, it's not like I won't be trying to get in melee range. But again, I have 5 stacks again. I can use another Lightning Bolt. I get a few melee hits on the target. And then I'm at 4 stacks. I can almost do another one. So that's at range pressure that you're able to do. You cannot hex, by the way, with Maelstrom Weapon. I want to just clarify that. So that's just something good to know. The other thing here is Stormkeeper. Stormkeeper is now on Enhance, and it can be used for Chain Lightning or for Lightning Bolt. I recommend in PvP saving this for Lightning Bolt because that's going to do much more damage. The base damage of Lightning Bolt is 389. The base damage for Chain Lightning is 190. So I definitely recommend Lightning Bolt, especially if you're trying to kill, mobs, even 3 mobs or less. I would still probably lean for Lightning Bolt just because the single damage is single target pressure is just better, and you have other potentially better AoE options than to Chain Lightning. But again, in PvP or in a kiting fight, a heavy kiting fight, you can be using Stormkeeper and then get those Lightning Bolts out. So you've seen me use Overcharge for instant cast Lightning Bolts, 3 of them. You've seen me use Stormkeeper for instant cast Lightning Bolts. You have a lot of instant cast potential as this build. The other one I would recommend to do is Earthen Spike, which is down here as the last talent. And I'm running it. Okay, there we go. So what I recommend here is before you use Stormkeeper, use Earthen Spike, because Earthen Spike does increase the nature and physical damage. So that is definitely something you should be using before you use Stormkeeper. That's going to increase the damage by an additional 20%, as well as do some damage, and it is a little bit ranged. So if you're trying to be a little bit more kitey boy, or if you're trying to be a little bit more, against a mage and you have to be a little bit more mobile, that's what I would recommend in this case. Now, it also does not say it increases fire damage, which is why Hot Hand does not really synergize well with that. Hot Hand synergizes well more with Elemental Spirits because it could potentially buff that up. So keep that in mind. So what does it look like to play these builds? Let's get to that next, and then we'll go kill some mobs and I'll show you some dungeon footage. All right, now to the range build. There's, again, the few things I can do before the fight. Drop Wind Fury, drop Searing. I can even pre-roll the Healing Totem. And so then when I want to open up the Flame Shock, run in, start Storm Striking. Right, now when I get to 5 stacks, I did get a Landslide proc, so I'm going to do some big damage. When I get to 5 stacks of the buff, I'm going to Earthen Spike, and then I'm going to use Stormkeeper, and then use the Stormkeeper. All right, I'm gonna Earthen Spike, Stormkeeper, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt. It's actually doing pretty good damage. 2000s are pretty good damage. Okay, it's another Stormkeeper's up. I'm looking for a free global to drop Searing again, but I don't have that yet. Stormkeeper, Stormkeeper, Or sorry, Storm Strike, Storm Strike. And now I have a free instant. I instant cast Lightning Bolt. Now let's say I want to go ahead. I want to use Earthen Spike. I want to use Overcharge. I use Lightning Bolt. I want to use Storm Strike. I'm going to use some other globals. Okay, I can do another Lightning Bolt because it's continuing to generate those Maelstrom weapon procs. Okay, another one, another Lightning Bolt. I'm going to drop Storm Strike. Storm Strike. I'll pop the Wolves. Another Storm Strike. I'm about to get another Earthen Strike up. Another Lightning Bolt. I'm going to Earthen Strike. Crash Lightning, free global-ish. I dropped Searing Totem there. I could have Rock Bitered, and then keep fishing for landslides. I probably want to conserve some of my Rock Biters in case I already have a proc up. All right, I'm going to instant cast Storm Keeper and then start Lightning Bolt. So this rotation, some people think might be clunky, but I actually do think it's pretty refreshing, especially compared to where Enhance came from before. Enhance coming from a, keep the plate spinning while working through just spamming the procs nonstop. That entire time, yeah, you saw me get procs, but I need to, and that wasn't even perfect, but I need to be using Earthen Spike. I need to be balancing a few things, but it's more intentional gameplay, which I really do appreciate. All right, so let me go in one more time with the most damage I can possibly do. I'm going to be using Sundering here. I'm going to be using Ascendance, and we're just going to try to go off as hard as we can into the target. So again, I'm going to pre-drop Wind Fury. I'm going to do Searing Totem, and we're going to pretty much get in there and ready to go. Flame Shock is the open. I'm going to Crash Lightning and start doing my rotation. Storm Strike procs are going to be my focus, and then whenever I get those procs, for my 5 Maelstrom weapons, I'm going to be using those on the Lightning Bolts because they're going to be doing pretty much the most damage unless I needed to heal or something like that. Refresh my Flame Shock. And now I'm going to get the momentum going. I'm going to pop the Ascendance and start Wind Striking. Now again, the one thing I'll say about Hot Hand is it doesn't necessarily proc a ton. And then it goes off. All right, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use Wind Strike. I'm going to use Hot Hand. I'm going to use Wind Strike. Hot Hand. So it alternates very nicely, actually. And the other thing I didn't do is I didn't use this Searing Totem. I didn't use this cooldown at all, which we'll use it right now. You have to pop Searing first, and then it will start being a little shooty boy. Oh, it actually won't hit the target? Okay, that's neat. But it would start shooting 100% faster than it normally does, and it hits for about 50. So it's going to start hitting for about, 100 a second instead of 50 a second. So that's basically the Enhanced Shaman in a nutshell. I'll show you some dungeon footage here, but in general, I do believe that this is a better form of Enhance than we had in BFA. Not having to manage Maelstrom, not having to manage the buffs that I was mentioning, Frostbrand and Flametongue, makes the gameplay a lot smoother, and it makes it a lot more intentional. You're not trying to get little passive increases of damage by having those buffs up. You're right now pressing every button that will do the damage. So I think in general it is very useful. The other thing that you haven't really seen through me hitting this target is the utility that I bring to the squad. Number 1, Wind Fury. Number 2, Bloodlust. Number 3, I have a significant amount of healing now that I can bring to a party through instant chain heals. I can drop Healing Stream, which heals for 22% of my max health every 30 seconds, and that doesn't even count crits. So that's pretty significant. Vesper Totem also is proving to be a pretty good utility for using with friends in dungeons or what have you. For massive amounts of healing, it actually heals more than it DPSs, to be honest. But the AoE potential for damage is there, and also the AoE potential for healing. So, guys, with that being said, this is me doing this dungeon actually with Dalaran as a surprise. I didn't realize that he was in here too. He's an awesome guy. You should make sure to check out his content. But with that being said, we went into this dungeon, and I was trying both Ellie and Enhance out in this dungeon on stream. To be honest, Enhance does feel very good to me. I do appreciate the way that it's been changed. Now, I will say there are some boss fights that make it very, very hard because you do need to have melee uptime on the boss. You do need to be able to get those auto attacks because those auto attacks will give you those Storm Strikes procs. It will also give you that Lava Lash proc. So if you don't think you're going to have uptime, you could try the range build, but I do think the range build is going to be more important for PvP and being kited situations. But it is worth giving it a try to see how the damage changes out. And to look at the damage breakdown quickly. The last build that I used about, that was using the melee build, Wind Fury attack actually was up on the top of the damage. And that was mostly doing between 100 and 300 damage, but that's pretty decent. Storm Strike doing, remember it hits with an offhand as well. So that was averaging crits of 800 with another crit of 400, so that's about 1,200. Melees being a significant portion. Wind Strike was big with Ascendance, hitting for 1.2 Ks, which is the same as the Star Surge from a Boomkin. I've been monitoring these numbers pretty closely. Lava Lash hitting upwards of 800 to 1.6 K, which is pretty significant. And then Flame Shock coming in about 10% of my damage. I mean, it's going to add up. Flame Tongue attack, remember this is just based off the offhand, was hitting for 40s, but that procs very often. Look, if you look at hit more than anything else here, it hit for 136 or 38 times. So that's that. There's other smaller things like Rock Biter did very little damage. Lightning Bolt didn't do that much damage. It overall did 400s, but if we look, that was potentially close to what a Lava Lash hits for, so it's not bad. So which is why, to be honest, it might be better in some cases for Elemental Blast to be part of the ranged build, but it's tough to say between Boulder Fist and Elemental Blast right now. And that's the melee build. Now for looking at the ranged build, Storm Strike was still number 1 damage. Lightning Bolt coming up as number 2, maxing out at crits at 2.3k, which is pretty respectable. Storm Strike it's kind of funny because you're still able to get that momentum on the target, but Lightning Bolt being number 2 is pretty significant, and that is from Stormkeeper and Earthen Spike. So just keep that in mind. Melee again is pretty significant. Storm Strike offhand. Flame Shock again, Flame Tongue, Lava Lash, Rock Biter. Rock Biter being a little bit higher here, probably because we're getting more off at range. Earthen Spike doesn't do that much damage, but it was 800 is a pretty respectable number right now. So that's that, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think. This is just kind of an overview, again, of what it feels like, the different 2 builds that I'm able to work through that feel pretty darn good. I'm not going to lie. I'm not trying to overhype things. I think it feels pretty good. It does feel much, much different, and it is overwhelming, the amount of abilities we are going to have now and where they all play a part, but it feels pretty decent. I will come out with other videos about suggestions about shamans, but for now, this is what I've come up with working with what we have. So with that being said, guys, I will see you guys on stream every day, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will see you in the next video, guys. Take care, everybody. Have a great one, and I'm very excited for Shadowlands. Hope you are too. Let me know what you are most excited about in the comments. Have a good night, everybody.